The first time Sadie Marsh called me the one I told you about, I was holding a casserole dish with both hands and had no idea what sentence I'd just walked into. Mom, Dad, this is Owen. The one I told you about. I stood frozen in the doorway of a lake house in Wisconsin, wearing a sweater Sadie had picked out for me specifically because she said my usual flannel made me look like I was auditioning for a logging documentary. Her mother's eyebrows shot up so fast I thought they might leave her face entirely. Her father set down his coffee mug like it had personally wronged him. Then Sadie reached over, laced her fingers through mine in front of both her parents, and squeezed. I am Owen Bennett, 26 years old, a structural engineer for a mid-sized firm in Minneapolis, a man who owned exactly one sweater that didn't have a coffee stain on it, and had, until 4 seconds ago, believed he understood the terms of his living arrangement. I inspected bridges for a living. I could tell you the load tolerance of a support beam within 5% accuracy. I could not, apparently, tell you what was happening in my own chest when my roommate's hand found mine like she'd done it 1,000 times before. The one you told us about, her mother repeated slowly, like she was testing whether the words might rearrange themselves into something less alarming. That Owen, Sadie said, like this clarified everything. It clarified nothing. It detonated something. Let me back up, because you deserve context before you watch a man's entire nervous system collapse in a stranger's kitchen. Sadie and I had been roommates for 14 months. We found each other through a mutual friend who got engaged and needed her spare bedroom vacated with, in her words, extreme prejudice. Sadie was 25, a physical therapist at a downtown clinic, with a laugh that started somewhere in her stomach and worked its way up until it took over her whole face. She had light brown hair that she was constantly pulling into a bun with a pencil because she claimed real hair ties were, quote, a scam invented by the same people who make dryer sheets disappear. She interviewed me for the room like she was screening a suspect. Did I cook or did I microwave things until they achieved a war crime? Did I believe dishes belonged in the sink overnight? A position she called morally bankrupt. And did I have strong feelings about houseplants? Because she owned 11 and considered them family. I told her I cooked adequately, washed dishes before bed out of pure anxiety, and would treat her plants with the same respect I gave load-bearing walls. She moved in 3 weeks later. Living with Sadie was easy in the specific way that later becomes a problem. She made too much coffee every morning and left the extra in a mug on the counter with a sticky note that said things like "drink me" or, on bad days, "Please, I'm begging you." I fixed the wobble in her desk chair without being asked. She learned I hated bell peppers and picked them out of everything before I noticed she'd done it. I learned she got quiet and short when work overwhelmed her, and that the correct response was not comfort but silence and a plate of nachos left outside her door. We were not dating. We had not kissed. We had, over 14 months, slowly built something that looked exactly like a relationship except for the two facts that would have made it one. Her family didn't know that. Apparently, her family didn't know that at all. To understand why that doorway hit me the way it did, you need to understand where I was coming from before Sadie moved into my life. 2 years before I met her, I'd lived with a woman named Vanessa for 18 months. We'd moved in together after dating for a year, both of us convinced that combining rent was the natural next step toward something permanent. Instead, it became the thing that exposed every crack we'd been ignoring. She wanted a partner who initiated plans. I wanted a partner who didn't treat every disagreement like a performance review. By month 12, we were passing each other in the hallway like co-workers who'd had a falling out neither of us could name. By month 18, she was gone, and so was half our furniture, most of our mutual friends, and any illusion I'd had that love and Elise could coexist safely. I told myself, packing boxes in an apartment that no longer felt like mine, that I would never again let a relationship and a rental agreement share the same foundation. It felt like wisdom at the time. Looking back, it was just fear wearing a tie. So when Sadie moved in 14 months before that lake house weekend, I made a private, unspoken rule. Whatever this was, Whatever warmth built up in the kitchen over shared coffee and terrible reality television, it would stay filed under friendship. Safe. Contained. Nothing that could take the apartment down with it if it ever went wrong. The problem with rules like that is they don't account for a person like Sadie Marsh. She started small. She left a spare key on my desk in week 2, in case you lock yourself out again, which, statistically, you will. She learned within a month that I hated bell peppers and started quietly removing them from every shared meal without comment, like it was simply understood. When my car broke down in a February ice storm, she drove 40 minutes each way to get me without being asked twice, blasting terrible pop music the entire ride and refusing to let me thank her more than once because, in her words, gratitude past the first sentence is just awkward. By month 6, we had rituals. Sunday mornings meant her making too much coffee and leaving the extra mug on the counter with a sticky note. Friday nights meant home renovation shows and increasingly heated arguments about open-concept floor plans. Wednesday, for reasons neither of us ever explained, became unofficial bad day night, where whoever had survived the worst week got the good blanket and first pick of takeout. I noticed, somewhere around month 8, that I had started comparing every date I went on, and I went on a few, mostly to prove to myself that my rule was still intact, to an evening on the couch with Sadie arguing about whether shiplap counted as a personality trait. None of those dates made it past a second outing. I told myself that was a coincidence. It was not a coincidence. It was a pattern I refused to look at directly, the way you avoid looking at the sun even when you know exactly where it is. Sadie, it turned out, had her own version of the same rule, built from her own history. She'd had a long relationship in her early 20s with a man named Trevor who treated every one of her ambitions like a minor inconvenience to his own. When she finally left him, she told me once, in the vague, careful way people discuss old wounds, she'd promised herself she'd never again let herself want someone that much before she was sure they wanted her back in equal measure. Better to keep things comfortable and undefined, she reasoned, than to hand someone the exact shape of her heart and watch them decide it wasn't worth carrying. So we built our comfortable, undefined thing for 14 months, both of us quietly terrified of naming it, both of us leaving nachos and desk chair repairs and extra coffee mugs like small, deniable love letters neither of us would sign. The lake house belonged to Sadie's parents, a squat, cheerful building with 2 mini windows and a dock that her father repaired every June with the seriousness of a man defusing a bomb. Sadie had invited me for what she called the annual Marsh family disaster, a long weekend of relatives, badminton, and her uncle's chili, which she warned me had ended 2 marriages, allegedly. I'd agreed because I liked her family from the stories, because I had nothing better to do with a long weekend, and because, if I'm being fully honest with you the way I wasn't being honest with myself, because it meant 3 more days with Sadie outside our normal routine of grocery runs and terrible television. We'd driven up together, 6 hours of gas station coffee, and an argument about whether Stairway to Heaven was actually good or just aggressively long. Somewhere around hour 4, she'd fallen asleep against the window, and I'd spent 20 miles not looking at the road nearly as much as I should have. When we arrived, her mother came out onto the porch wiping her hands on a dish towel, already smiling before the car doors opened. Her father followed a step behind, the particular posture of a man who had learned to let his wife handle the enthusiasm. That's when Sadie grabbed the casserole dish out of the trunk, handed it to me like I was furniture that could carry things, and walked me straight up the porch steps into the sentence that changed my entire weekend. "Mom, Dad, this is Owen. The one I told you about." I want to be clear that I had heard this phrase used before in other contexts about other people, and it had never once meant platonic roommate who occasionally waters your daughter's ferns. The one I told you about is a phrase with weight. It's a phrase that implies prior conversations, late-night phone calls, a mother asking, "So is anything happening with that roommate of yours?" and a daughter answering in a way that required a follow-up. Sadie's mother's whole face rearranged itself into something bright and a little too knowing. "Well," she said, It's about time we met you properly. Properly. As if there had been an improper meeting I wasn't aware of. Her father extended a hand, shook mine with the firm, evaluating grip of a man who had clearly given this handshake some thought in advance, and said, "Owen, good to finally put a face to it. To it. Not to the name. To it." I looked at Sadie. Sadie was already walking into the house with a cooler, humming, entirely unbothered, as if she had not just detonated a small emotional device in the doorway and left me standing in the blast radius holding baked ziti. I found her 20 minutes later in the kitchen, unpacking groceries with the focus of someone actively avoiding a conversation. "Sadie, Owen, you want to explain the doorway?" She didn't look up from the bag of chips she was placing in a cabinet with unnecessary precision. "What about the doorway?" "The one I told you about," I said. "That doorway. That sentence. It's just a thing people say. It's not a thing people say about their roommate, Sadie. People don't introduce their roommate to their parents as the one I told you about. People introduce their roommate as, 'This is Owen. He lives in the room next to the bathroom. Please don't ask him about his taxes.'" That got the corner of her mouth to move, but she still wouldn't look at me directly, which told me more than the sentence had. "Okay," she said finally, setting down a box of crackers like it required careful handling. "Maybe I've talked about you. On the phone. With my mom. Talked about me how? Regular amounts. Sadie. Fine." She turned around, arms crossed, chin lifted in the way she got when she was about to say something true and didn't love that about herself. "Maybe every time she asked how things were going, I ended up talking about you instead of my actual life, because somewhere along the way you became the most interesting thing that happens in my apartment, and I didn't notice I was doing it until she started asking pointed questions about my roommate situation like she suspected something." I set the casserole dish down very carefully because I did not trust my hands. Did she suspect something? She suspects everything. She's my mother. It's a professional skill. "Sadie, what? Is she wrong?" The kitchen went very quiet. Outside, I could hear her father testing the dock boards, the hollow knock of wood against wood, methodical and slow. Sadie looked at me for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted from defensive to unguarded so fast I almost missed the transition. "I don't know," she said. "Are we going to find out this weekend, or are we going to keep pretending the extra coffee mug every morning is a coincidence?" I didn't have an answer ready. I'd spent 14 months not having an answer ready, filing every warm feeling under roommate happiness and every jealous flicker under normal friend concern, because admitting otherwise meant admitting I'd built something fragile on top of a lease agreement, and the last time I did that, it ended with me sleeping on a friend's couch for 6 weeks and losing a coffee table in the settlement. Sadie watched me not answer. Then, mercifully, her mother called from the other room that lunch was ready, and the moment dissolved into forced normalcy and deviled eggs. Lunch was an ambush disguised as a meal. Sadie's mother, who introduced herself as Renee, then immediately told me to call her Renee Marsh if I wanted to be formal about it, which I did not, sat directly across from me at the long picnic table and began what I can only describe as a friendly interrogation. "So, Owen, Sadie tells me you're an engineer. Structural, yes. And you two have lived together, what, a year now?" 14 months. 14 months, she repeated, glancing at her husband like this number confirmed a theory. "That's a long time to just be roommates." "Mom," Sadie said, in the exact tone I used on my mother when she started asking about grandchildren. "I'm just making conversation, Sadie. It's called hospitality. It's called an ambush with a side of potato salad." Her father, a quiet man named Gordon who I would come to like enormously over the course of the weekend, looked up from his plate and said, without much ceremony, "She talks about you a lot, son. That's all your mother's getting at," in her subtle way. "Very subtle," Sadie muttered. "I water her plants," I offered, weakly, as if this explained anything. "He fixed my desk chair," Sadie said, and it came out sounding less like evidence for the defense and more like a confession. "And he remembers I hate bell peppers. And when I have a bad day at work, He leaves nachos outside my door instead of asking me to talk about it, because he figured out 3 weeks after I moved in that talking about it makes it worse, and nobody's ever figured that out before. The table went quiet. Even her uncle, 3 seats down, paused mid-chew. I looked at Sadie. She looked mortified, like the sentence had escaped before she'd fully approved its release, and was now standing in the middle of the table for everyone to examine. I started. I know, she said quickly. I don't know why I said all that. I do, Renee said, smiling the particular smile of a mother who has just watched her theory confirm itself in real time. Past the potato salad, Gordon. The afternoon involved badminton, which Sadie played with a competitive intensity that bordered on concerning. She and her cousin Marissa formed an alliance against me and Uncle Ray that I can only describe as ruthless, complete with trash talk that would have embarrassed a professional athlete. And when I finally managed to score a point against her, she looked personally betrayed, like I'd violated some unspoken rule of roommate loyalty by trying too hard. You're supposed to let me win, she informed me, hands on her hips. Since when? Since always. It's an unwritten rule of cohabitation. I've never once let you win at anything. You beat me at Scrabble legitimately every single time. That's different. Scrabble is a battle of intellects. This is a battle of feelings, and my feelings say you should be losing. I lost the next point on purpose after that, mostly because watching her celebrate was better than winning, and Marissa, standing beside her, gave me a knowing look that suggested she'd clocked exactly what was happening between us well before her aunt had said a word at the door. Later, there was a 2-hour stretch where I helped her father fix a loose board on the dock while he asked me questions that felt less like small talk and more like a structural inspection of my intentions. You like her, he said. Not a question. I considered lying. Gordon did not strike me as a man you lied to while holding a hammer near his daughter's dock. Yeah, I said. I do. 14 months is a long time to sit on that. I know. You scared of something, or just slow? I laughed, because it was the kind of question that deserved honesty rather than deflection. Both, probably. I had a relationship end badly a couple years back. We lived together. When it fell apart, it took the apartment, half our friends, and my coffee table with it. I promised myself I wouldn't build something serious on top of a lease again. Gordon nodded slowly, driving a nail with 3 efficient strikes. That's a reasonable fear. Bad foundation, and everything built on it comes down eventually. Right. But you're an engineer. You know the difference between a bad foundation and a scared one. I didn't have an answer for that. He didn't seem to need one. He just handed me another nail and let the conversation end there, which I appreciated more than I could say. That evening, after most of the relatives had scattered to their rooms or the fire pit outside, I found Sadie sitting alone on the dock, feet dangling over water-gone silver with the last of the sunset. I sat down beside her without asking, close enough that our shoulders touched. Your dad interrogated me about the dock repair, I said. I think it was actually about you. He does that. He interrogated my cousin's boyfriend for 40 minutes once. The guy left before dessert. Should I be worried? You're still here, aren't you? We sat in silence for a minute, the water lapping quietly against the dock posts, someone's laughter drifting over from the fire pit. I owe you an apology, Sadie said finally, for the doorway thing. I didn't plan to say that. It just came out. Because that's how I think of you, apparently, even when I'm not trying to. You don't owe me an apology. I put you in an awkward spot. My whole family's been treating you like a boyfriend reveal all weekend. They're not wrong to wonder, I said, and my heart started doing something unhelpful and fast in my chest. I've been wondering the same thing for a while. I just haven't said it out loud. Sadie went very still beside me. Said what out loud? I looked at her, at the lake behind her turning the color of a bruise in the fading light, at the particular way she was watching me like she already knew what I was going to say and was terrified of it landing wrong. That I don't think I've been your roommate for a long time, I said. I think I've been in love with you for months and calling it convenient scheduling. Her breath caught audibly. Owen, you don't have to say anything back. I just didn't want to keep letting your mother do the confessing for both of us. Sadie laughed, a short, surprised sound, and then her eyes went shiny in the dusk light. She really did do that, didn't she? Just announced my entire emotional state over potato salad. In her defense, she seemed pretty confident about it. She's been confident about it for months. She asks about you every single call. I used to change the subject. Then I stopped bothering because there was nothing else worth talking about. I reached over and took her hand, the same hand she'd taken in the doorway that morning, except this time it wasn't a performance for her parents. This time it was just us, on a dock, with the whole lake going quiet around us. How long? I asked. Does it matter? Yes. She exhaled, long and slow, like she was setting something down she'd been carrying a while. Since the desk chair, probably. You fixed it without me asking, and I remember standing in the doorway of my room watching you tighten a screw and thinking, oh no, this is going to be a problem. That was month 2. I told you it mattered. So you've been sitting on this for a year. I've been sitting on this for a year while you brought me nachos and learned my coffee order and never once made a move. So forgive me for assuming you weren't interested. I was terrified, I admitted. Every time I thought about saying something, I thought about the apartment falling apart if it went wrong, about losing you and the lease and the whole life we'd built in that space, all in one conversation. And now? I looked at her, really looked, the way I'd been trying not to for 14 months. Now I think I'd rather risk the apartment than keep pretending I don't want you. Sadie's eyes filled, and this time she didn't try to blink it away. That's annoyingly romantic for a man who alphabetizes his spice rack. I contain multitudes. You really don't. You contain one multitude, and it's mild anxiety. And you, I said. Apparently that too now. She laughed, wet and real, and then she leaned in and kissed me, soft and a little uncertain at first, like she was testing whether the dock would hold the weight of what we were doing. It held. I kissed her back, my hand coming up to her jaw, and for a long moment there was nothing in the world except the smell of lake water and sunscreen and the sound of her breath catching against my mouth. When we broke apart, she stayed close, forehead against mine. So, she said, the one I told you about. I'd like an official transcript of what, exactly, you told her. Absolutely not. That information is classified. Sadie, it's embarrassing. There was a whole phone call about your forearms. I stared at her. My forearms. You roll your sleeves up when you cook. I have never recovered. I laughed so hard I nearly fell off the dock, and Sadie grabbed my arm to steady me, still laughing herself. And somewhere behind us I heard the unmistakable sound of her mother's voice carrying faintly from the porch. Gordon, they're kissing on the dock. Get the camera. We did not get up from that dock for another 20 minutes. Mostly because getting up meant walking back into a house full of relatives who now had visual confirmation of exactly what Sadie's doorway announcement had implied, and neither of us felt ready for round 2 of the interrogation. We could just live out here, I suggested. Build a small structure. I have relevant skills. You want to become a lake hermit rather than face my Aunt Diane. Aunt Diane specifically, yes. She asked me 3 separate times today if I had intentions. Do you? Apparently, yes. As of about 20 minutes ago, extremely serious ones. Sadie smiled at that, the kind of smile that made the whole dock feel warmer than the actual temperature justified. We have to go back eventually. My mother will send a search party, possibly with the camera she just requested. 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes, she agreed, and tucked herself against my side, her head on my shoulder, watching the last color drain out of the sky over the water. Can I ask you something? Sadie said, before we stood up. And you have to answer honestly, even if it's terrifying. Okay. When you said you were scared of the apartment falling apart if this went wrong, is that still true? Right now, sitting here? I thought about it, because she deserved a real answer and not a reflexive one. A little, I admitted. The fear doesn't just switch off because I finally said something. But it's smaller than it was an hour ago, and it's a lot smaller than how much I want this to work. She nodded slowly, like she was weighing that against something of her own. I need you to know something too, then. If this doesn't work, if we try and it falls apart the way your last one did, I'm not going to disappear quietly and let you clean up the wreckage alone. I'll fight for it first. I don't do the quiet fading thing. It's not in me. Good, I said. Because neither do I. Not with you. You say that now. I mean it now, and I'll mean it later. Ask me again in 6 months if you don't believe me. I might, she said, half a threat, half a promise, and the way she said it settled something in my chest that had been unsettled for over a year. Eventually, we did walk back up to the house, hand in hand this time. No pretense left to hide behind. Renee was waiting on the porch with the exact expression of a woman who had predicted an outcome and was now collecting on the bet. Well, she said, I take it introductions are officially complete. Mom, I'm just saying, it took you too long enough. I was starting to think I'd have to write the toast myself. Nobody asked for a toast. Nobody needs to ask, Sadie, that's how toasts work. Gordon appeared in the doorway behind her, looked at our joined hands, and gave a single satisfied nod, like a man confirming a structural repair had held under load. Doc survive? Doc's fine, I said. Good. Wasn't sure it was built for that kind of pressure. Dad, I'm an engineer, Gordon, I said. I checked the load tolerance before I sat down. Gordon laughed, a real laugh, and clapped me on the shoulder on his way back inside. And I understood, standing there on that porch with Sadie's hand in mine, and her whole family already treating the last 14 months like an inevitability rather than a secret, that I had walked into that lake house a roommate and was walking out of it something else entirely. The drive home 2 days later was different from the drive up. Sadie sat closer, her hand resting on my leg instead of tucked into her own lap. And somewhere around hour 3 she fell asleep against my shoulder instead of the window, and I didn't mind the extra 20 miles of careful driving one bit. Back at the apartment, the first thing we did, before unpacking, before checking the mail, before anything sensible, was stand in the kitchen doorway where, 14 months earlier, she'd shown me the lease and asked if I minded eating dinner together sometimes so the place didn't feel so quiet. This is where it started, she said. Technically it started at the desk chair. Fine. This is where it became official, then. Officially official. Not Lake House official, which apparently doesn't count because my mother did the actual announcing. I think it counts. She had strong conviction. She had months of phone calls to build that conviction on. I pulled her closer, my hands finding her waist the way they had on the dock, and kissed her in the exact spot where, over a year ago, I'd first learned she hated bell peppers and thought nothing more of it than that she was a woman with strong culinary opinions. For the record, I said, I'm glad she said it. The doorway thing. I would have kept pretending for another year if she hadn't. You're welcome to send her a thank you card. She'd frame it. She'd frame it and mail me a copy. 2 copies. 1 for each of us. She's efficient like that. We didn't change much, at first. The coffee mug with the sticky note stayed on the counter every morning, except now it came with a kiss instead of just a note. The nachos outside the door became a shared ritual instead of a one-way gesture. We still argued about Led Zeppelin. She still stole the good blanket. I still fixed things around the apartment without being asked, though now she thanked me in ways that made fixing things considerably more motivating. 1 year into dating, we sat down at our kitchen table. The same apartment, the same lease that had once terrified me so badly, and had a conversation neither of us rushed into. We talked about whether staying in that apartment still made sense now that it wasn't a convenient arrangement, but an actual home we'd built on purpose. We talked about her dream of opening her own physical therapy practice someday, about whether either of us even wanted to leave the place where all of this had quietly started in the first place. In the end, we stayed. We repainted the kitchen a color Sadie picked out, and I pretended to hate for exactly 1 week before admitting I liked it. We kept the desk chair I'd fixed a dozen times, even after buying a new one, because Sadie insisted it stay in the closet for sentimental reasons, which is how I ended up storing a slightly wobbly chair for 2 years without complaint. The extra coffee mug stayed on the counter every morning, sticky notes and all, though the notes got softer over time. Less please, I'm begging you, and more things neither of us would admit to writing if you asked us directly. It wasn't all easy, though. I want to be honest about that part too. because the story doesn't mean much if I skip the part where we almost broke it before it had a chance to set. About 6 weeks after we got back from the lake house, Trevor resurfaced. Not dramatically. He didn't show up at the apartment or make a scene. He sent Sadie a message out of nowhere, something vague about being in town and wanting to catch up. No pressure, the kind of message designed to sound casual while doing anything but. Sadie showed it to me immediately, which I appreciated, but I still felt something ugly and unfamiliar twist in my chest reading his name on her screen. I didn't say anything that night. I told myself it wasn't a big deal, that showing me the message was the whole point, that she'd clearly already decided how she felt about it. But over the next few days, I got quieter than usual, and Sadie noticed, because Sadie noticed everything. "You've been weird since Tuesday," she said, cornering me in the kitchen on a Thursday night, while I very intently organized a drawer that did not need organizing. "I'm not weird. You alphabetized the spice rack. You only do that when you're avoiding a feeling." I set down the cumin. "It's nothing. It's stupid. Owen." "It's Trevor," I admitted. "I know you have no interest in seeing him. I know that. But some idiot part of my brain keeps asking why he gets to text you out of nowhere and just casually try to insert himself back into your life. And I hate that it's bothering me this much, because it makes me feel like the guy who can't trust a good thing when he finally has it." Sadie was quiet for a moment, studying me in a way that made me feel entirely too visible. Then she crossed the kitchen and took both my hands. "I'm not going to pretend that message didn't bother me too. In a different way," she said. "It bothered me because for 1 second, old Sadie, the one who used to shrink herself down to keep a relationship comfortable, wondered if I should just ignore it and not make it a thing. And then I remembered I don't have to be that person anymore. So I blocked him. 2 days ago. I didn't tell you because I didn't think it needed an announcement. You blocked him. The second I showed you the message and saw your face try really hard to look like nothing was wrong. I know your nothing's wrong face, Owen. It's the same one you make when the Vikings lose." I laughed despite myself, some of the tightness in my chest finally loosening. "That's a low bar for emotional transparency. It's an accurate bar. Look, I get why Trevor's showing up messed with you. You built a rule around never losing something like this again. And here's a ghost from my past reminding you that things end. But I need you to trust that when I tell you I chose you, on that dock, I meant it as a decision, not a mood. I don't unmake decisions because an old text message shows up." I pulled her into me, resting my chin on top of her head, feeling something settle that had been shifting under my feet for 4 days. "I'm sorry I went quiet instead of just saying it. I know. That's rule 4, by the way. New rule. We're making rules now, apparently. What's rule 4? No going quiet when we mean scared. Say the scared part out loud instead of alphabetizing the spice rack. That's a good rule. I know. I'm very wise. It's a burden. We didn't have a fight like that again. Not exactly, though we had smaller versions of it over the following months. Moments where old fears from old relationships tried to climb back into the room uninvited. Each time, one of us named it instead of letting it fester, and each time, the naming made it smaller, until eventually those old fears stopped showing up at all. 3 months in, her mother called and asked, with the elaborate casualness of a woman who had given up pretending she wasn't invested, whether we'd made any big decisions yet. "Mom, we've been together for 3 months. 14 months and 3 months, Sadie. I'm doing math over here. You're doing pressure, not math. Same thing, in my experience." Sadie hung up laughing, shaking her head, and told me her mother had already started asking Gordon whether the lake house was booked for next summer, just in case. In case of what? I didn't ask. I'm scared of the answer. The following winter, we hosted Renee and Gordon for a weekend in Minneapolis, the first time they'd stayed in the apartment where all of this had technically, unofficially, quietly begun over a year and a half earlier. Renee inspected the coffee mug situation with the thoroughness of a woman confirming a hypothesis and pronounced herself satisfied. Gordon inspected the desk chair, found the fix still holding, and pronounced himself equally satisfied, in fewer words. Before Renee and Gordon left, I finally introduced Sadie properly to my own parents, something I'd been putting off partly out of nerves and partly because my mother had a habit of asking questions with the subtlety of a wrecking ball. We drove out to my childhood home on a Sunday, Sadie holding a pie she'd baked from scratch despite my insistence that my mother did not require bribery, only to watch my mother take one look at Sadie in the doorway and say, without any preamble at all, "Oh, thank God. Finally, a woman with opinions." "Mom, what?" "Your last girlfriend agreed with everything I said." It was unsettling. I don't trust people who don't disagree with me at least once. Sadie, delighted, launched immediately into a spirited defense of open shelving in kitchens, a topic my mother apparently had strong opposing views on. And the two of them argued happily through the entire meal, while my father caught my eye across the table and mouthed, "She's a keeper," in a way that made my chest go warm and tight at once. By dessert, my mother had already asked Sadie 3 separate questions about her 5-year plan, her thoughts on Wisconsin winters, and whether she'd ever considered moving somewhere with better shelving stores, which I took as the highest compliment my mother was capable of giving. Sadie handled all of it with the same grace and quiet amusement she'd shown at the lake house, and on the drive home, she reached over and squeezed my hand. "Your mom likes me. My mom loves you. She only argues that much with people she respects." "Good," Sadie said, "because I like her too. She reminded me a little of my own mom, honestly. Terrifyingly direct, completely unable to hide what she's thinking, and somehow always right in the end. That's a genetic condition mothers share, I think. Cross-species. Cross-family, maybe. Same thing at this point." On their last night, over dinner, Renee set down her fork and looked between us with an expression that made Sadie visibly brace herself. "I have a confession," Renee said. "Oh no. I've known since the desk chair phone call. The one where you described, in unnecessary detail, how he tightened a screw. Mom, I'm just saying, the one I told you about wasn't a spontaneous slip at the door. I'd been building that introduction for a year. I was just waiting for you two to catch up to what I already knew." I looked at Sadie. Sadie looked at me, then back at her mother, mortified and laughing at the same time, the exact combination I'd come to associate with every conversation involving Renee Marsh. "You planned it," Sadie said. "You planned the doorway." I didn't plan the exact wording, but I knew if I said it plainly enough, in front of you both, one of you would finally have to do something about it. Subtlety wasn't working. I tried subtlety for 8 months. That wasn't subtlety, Mom. That was reconnaissance. Semantics. Gordon, from the end of the table, simply raised his glass. "To reconnaissance," he said. It worked. I raised mine too, and under the table, Sadie's hand found mine. The same hand she'd taken in that doorway the day everything changed, and I thought about how strange it was that the moment that finally broke us open hadn't been anything either of us had planned or said. It had been her mother, 3 sentences into a hello, cutting straight through 14 months of careful pretending like it was nothing at all. 2 years after that lake house weekend, we stood on the same dock, except this time there were string lights strung along the railing, and Sadie wore a dress instead of hiking shorts, and about 40 of our combined family and friends were arranged on the lawn behind us pretending not to cry. "Ready?" I asked her, the same question I'd asked on that first dock evening, though the stakes had changed considerably. "You sound nervous." "I checked the load tolerance on this dock personally. Twice." She laughed, the same stomach-deep laugh that had ruined me from month 2 onward, and squeezed my hand. "It'll hold." It held the first time. Renee, seated in the front row, was already dabbing her eyes with a tissue and mouthing something to Gordon that looked suspiciously like "I told you so." Gordon just nodded, patient and satisfied. A man who had watched a structural repair hold under years of pressure and felt entirely vindicated. I hadn't told her the proposal was coming that particular weekend, though in hindsight I think Renee suspected. Mothers like her always seem to know a full season before anyone confirms it aloud. I'd spent 3 months planning it, driving up to the lake house alone one weekend under the excuse of checking on some repairs for Gordon, when really I was measuring the exact board on the dock where I wanted to be standing when I asked her, making sure the load tolerance, both structural and metaphorical, could hold everything I was about to put on it. When the day came, I told Sadie we were going up for a quiet weekend, just the two of us, no family, no badminton tournament, no Aunt Diane asking pointed questions about intentions. She looked at me a little suspiciously in the car. "You're being weirdly nice. You bought me 2 coffees today, but let it go." Mostly, I think, because she was enjoying the quiet too much to interrogate it. We walked down to the dock after dinner. The same dock, the same slow lapping water. Though this time string lights were already strung along the railing because I'd driven up 2 days earlier and put them there myself, along with 40 chairs I'd hidden in Gordon's boat shed and 40 invitations I'd mailed without telling her, addressed to everyone who mattered to us, all instructed to arrive quietly the following afternoon while we were out on a hike that was actually just me stalling for time. Sadie noticed the lights first. "Owen, why does the dock look like it's hosting something?" "Does it? You strung fairy lights. You hate fairy lights. You called them, and I quote, a fire hazard with delusions of romance. I contain multitudes. You contain one anxious multitude who is currently sweating through his shirt in 50-degree weather. What's happening?" I got down on one knee before she finished the sentence, and whatever she'd been about to say next disappeared entirely. The ring had been sitting in my jacket pocket for 6 hours, and my hand was shaking badly enough that I nearly dropped it getting the box open. But I got the words out anyway, the ones I'd rehearsed in the car 11 separate times, and abandoned all 11 times the second I actually looked at her face. "Sadie Marsh," I said, 14 months ago, I was terrified of building anything real with anyone again. Then your mother stood in a doorway and told the truth before either of us was brave enough to. And every single day since then has been the best evidence I have that some structures are worth the risk. I don't want to just be the one you told your mother about. I want to be the one you tell everyone about for the rest of our lives. Will you marry me?" She said yes before I finished the question, which I'm told is fairly standard, though it did mean I had to ask her to let me finish so I could actually put the ring on her finger, which she found unreasonably funny given the circumstances. When I finally did, she pulled me up and kissed me hard enough that I nearly lost my balance on the same dockboard Gordon had once made me help repair, and somewhere behind us, up at the house, I heard the unmistakable sound of 40 people who'd been hiding on the porch the entire time erupting into applause. Sadie turned, saw all of them, saw her mother already crying into Gordon's shoulder, and rounded on me with an expression somewhere between disbelief and delight. "You didn't." "I did. In my defense, your mother helped." "Of course she did. She's been planning this practically since the desk chair phone call, honestly. I just filled in the details." A year later, we stood on that same dock again, this time for the wedding itself, string lights strung once more, 40 guests grown to nearly 80, and Sadie in a dress that made every rehearsed vow I'd written temporarily disappear from my brain the second I saw her walking toward me. When I said my vows, I told the story of the doorway, the casserole dish, the frozen silence, the sentence that detonated everything I'd spent 14 months pretending not to feel. I told them about the doc, about her mother's reconnaissance campaign, about learning that sometimes the truth doesn't arrive because you finally find the courage to say it. Sometimes it arrives because someone who loves you both gets tired of waiting and says it for you. Sadie cried through the whole thing, and when it was her turn, she looked at her mother in the front row and said, "For the record, I never actually told her to say that at the door. She just knew. She'd known for months. And thank God she did, because we clearly needed the push." Renee, from the front row, mouthed the words "you're welcome" so clearly that half the guests laughed out loud, and Gordon leaned over to hand her a fresh tissue with the resigned efficiency of a man who'd packed an entire box specifically for this occasion. Marissa, 3 seats down, leaned over to Aunt Diane and whispered something that made them both laugh, and later I found out it was simply, "Told you the badminton loss meant something." Apparently, my one sacrifice point on that dock 2 years earlier had been treated by the entire Marsh family as confirmed evidence of my intentions long before either Sadie or I had said a word out loud. I was, it turned out, a far less subtle man than I'd believed myself to be. Later that night, dancing on the same dock where I'd first told her the truth, Sadie rested her head against my chest and said, "You know, I used to think the one I told you about was the most mortifying sentence anyone had ever said about me in public. And now? Now I think it might be the most accurate one." I kissed the top of her head, holding her under the same string of lights, on the same water, in the same spot where an accidental introduction had turned into an entire life neither of us had been brave enough to ask for on our own. Somewhere behind us, the reception was still going. Someone's cousin badly attempting a dance move he'd clearly learned from a video that morning. Renee laughing loudly enough to carry over the music. Gordon standing quietly by the dock railing with the satisfied look of a man who had spent 2 years watching a repair hold exactly as well as he'd hoped it would. "Hey," Sadie said, tilting her face up to look at me. "Thank you for checking the load tolerance twice." "Anytime. It's what I do." "I know. It's why I fell for you in the first place." "Well, that and the forearms." "The forearms again. Always the forearms." "For the record," I said, "I'm the one. Officially. Lake House official, wedding official, all of it." "Damn right you are," she said, and pulled me closer, and we danced until the lights along the dock were the only thing left glowing over the water. What would you have done if your roommate introduced you to her parents as the one she told them about, then grabbed your hand in front of everyone? Have you ever had someone else say the truth out loud before you were brave enough to say it yourself? Tell your story in the comments. And for those who'd like to be a little closer to us, we've opened memberships where you'll get shorter exclusive stories every week with no ads. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.